Welcome back, my jewels. As always, before we begin, grab your scuba gear because today we're diving beneath the surface. Before we begin today's conversation, I want to say something to the families who may hear this episode. I want you to know that this is not a conversation created to revisit your pain, analyze your loss, or add another opinion to a world that has already said too much. This episode is for you. It is a reminder that behind every headline, every news story, every social media discussion, and every public debate, there is a family that is hurting. There is a mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent, and loved ones who are trying to navigate a pain that most of us will never fully understand. Today's episode is different because, honestly, I think we need to talk about something we seem to be losing: empathy. Somewhere along the way, we have become comfortable watching people experience unimaginable pain and then turning that pain into a conversation, a debate, or a place to prove a point. We have become so focused on being right that sometimes we forget to be human. We forget that before there was an opinion, there was a person. Before there was a story, there was a life. Before there was a headline, there was a family who loved someone deeply. I want to read an open letter today because I believe there are families who need to hear that their loved one's life was more than the conversation that surrounded their loss. They were more than a headline. They were more than a social media post. They were more than a moment people argued about online. They were someone's child, someone's sibling, someone's friend, someone's entire world. And for my listeners, I want us to sit with this conversation differently. This is not about choosing a side. This is not about ignoring difficult conversations or pretending that questions do not exist. This is about remembering that compassion does not require us to have all the answers. Empathy does not ask us to agree with everything. It asks us to recognize another person's humanity. So today, I am asking all of us to listen differently. Before we comment, before we judge, before we decide we know someone's entire story, I want us to remember one simple thing. Behind every public tragedy is a family privately carrying a loss they never wanted. This is for them. This is for the families whose grief became public. And this is a reminder that even in a world full of opinions, we should never lose our ability to show compassion. Dear parents and families, I have been thinking about something that has become far too common in the world we live in today. What happens when someone's deepest pain becomes everyone else's conversation? There is no preparation for losing a child. There is no language that can truly explain what it feels like for a parent to have to continue living in a world where their child is no longer physically present. But what makes that pain even harder to carry is when that grief becomes public. When a family's most devastating moment becomes a topic of discussion, debate, opinions, and judgment from people who have never sat at their kitchen table, never heard their child's laughter, never witnessed their dreams, and never understood the love that existed before the world ever knew their name. Before your child became a headline, before their name became attached to a story, before strangers began forming opinions about who they were simply your child. They were the person who filled a space in your home and in your heart that no one else could fill. They were the child whose smile you remember, whose personality you knew, whose victories you celebrated, and whose struggles you carried with them. They were not a hashtag, a talking point, a political symbol, or a piece of content for people to consume. They were a human being with a life, a story, and a family who loved them. The world may have learned about them through a tragedy, but you knew them through a lifetime of moments that no article, social media post, or news segment could ever capture. What has become incredibly difficult to watch is how quickly compassion disappears when someone's life becomes part of a public conversation. Instead of stopping to recognize that a family is grieving, people immediately begin searching for explanations, assigning blame, finding flaws, or trying to determine whether someone is worthy of sympathy. We have created a culture where people feel comfortable examining a person's entire existence after they are gone, looking for something that allows them to justify their opinions. We search for old posts, past mistakes, personal choices, or anything else that helps us feel like we have the right to decide how much compassion someone deserves. But the reality is that no person is perfect, and no imperfection should ever erase the fact that a family has lost someone they love. Somewhere along the way, we have forgotten that two things can exist at the same time. We can have conversations about circumstances without forgetting humanity. We can ask questions without turning someone's death into a competition of who deserves empathy more. We can acknowledge difficult conversations without forgetting that there are real people behind the story. Too often, we take a person's life and reduce them down to one moment, one decision, one accusation, or one narrative created by people who never knew them. We forget that a person's entire existence cannot be measured by the opinions of strangers who only know a small piece of their story. The heartbreaking reality is that when tragedy becomes public, children often become symbols for battles they never chose to fight. Their names become connected to political arguments, social movements, and personal beliefs. While people online are debating what their lives mean, their families are left trying to survive what their absence means. They are waking up to birthdays that will never be celebrated the same way. They are looking at pictures and hearing memories that only they understand. They are learning how to move through holidays, family gatherings, and everyday moments knowing someone who should be there is missing. The world sees a conversation, but a family is living a loss. And unlike many things in life, the internet does not allow people to simply heal and move forward. The comments remain, the accusations remain, the opinions from people who never knew the person remain. Years later, a family's grief can still be surrounded by conversations that they never asked for and narratives they never created. Imagine having to miss someone every single day while also watching strangers debate their worth. Imagine having to protect the memory of your child from people who never took the time to know them. That is a burden no parent should ever have to carry. I think we all need to ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions. When did we become so comfortable discussing the value of someone's life after they are no longer here to defend themselves? When did we decide that every tragedy requires us to choose a side instead of choosing compassion? When did we forget that behind every headline is a family who has to continue living after the cameras leave and the conversations move on to the next story? We can disagree about circumstances. We can discuss policies, accountability, and difficult topics, but we should never allow those conversations to remove our ability to see another person's humanity. To every parent and every family who has had their grief placed under a microscope, I hope you remember this. The opinions of strangers will never outweigh the memories you carry. The people commenting online will never know the moments that made your child special. They will never know the conversations, the laughter, the dreams, the challenges, and the love that existed between you. They only know a piece of a story, but you knew the whole person. Your child was never just a headline. They were never just a debate. They were never just a moment people discussed and moved on from. They were loved, they mattered. They changed your life simply by being in it. And perhaps that is something we all need to remember before we comment, before we judge, before we decide we understand someone's tragedy. We should remember that every name belongs to someone. Every story belongs to someone. Every loss belongs to someone. And behind every public tragedy is a family privately trying to learn how to live without someone they never wanted to lose. Jade Mills, The Fishbowl with Jade.